The sterile scent of disinfectant barely masked the faint, metallic tang of regret that permeated the air. Outside, the morning sun glinted off the polished chrome of a luxury sedan, a jarring contrast to the grim, imposing concrete walls that loomed ahead. A man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that whispered of European craftsmanship and understated wealth, adjusted his silk tie, his reflection a sharp, almost chiseled image in the tinted window. His gaze, however, was fixed not on his own prosperous silhouette, but on the heavily fortified entrance of the formidable structure before him. 10 years. A decade had evaporated since he last saw her, since their lives had fractured into irreconcilable pieces. Now, a millionaire many times over, he stood on the precipice of revisiting a past he had painstakingly buried, a past that promised to rip open old wounds. What secret could possibly compel him to return to this place, to confront the ghost of a love he thought long extinguished? This man was David, a name synonymous with innovation and shrewd business acumen in the cutthroat world of tech and finance. At barely 38, he commanded a sprawling empire, his net worth measured in digits that most people only dreamed of. His meteoric rise from humble beginnings to a self-made millionaire was a testament to his relentless drive and singular focus. He lived a life of opulent solitude, his sprawling penthouse in a bustling U.S. metropolis a testament to his success, yet also a subtle echo of the void at its core. Every morning he woke to panoramic city views, the hum of urban life a constant, distant symphony. But the silence within his vast, minimalist dwelling remained profound, almost deafening. His days were a blur of high-stakes meetings, international calls, and strategic maneuvers, leaving little room for personal connection, perhaps by design. Yet, despite the towering achievements and the gilded cage of his existence, a shadow always lingered, a question he never dared to voice, a story he never allowed himself to finish. The catalyst for this unsettling journey had arrived 2 weeks prior, a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the embossed letterhead of Sullivan and Associates, attorneys at law. It had sat on his antique mahogany desk for a full day, an unwelcome intruder amidst the meticulously organized stacks of financial reports and investment portfolios. When he finally opened it, the precise, almost archaic script inside had unleashed a torrent of long-suppressed emotions. It was from an old lawyer, a name David faintly recognized from the tumultuous period that had reshaped his life. The letter stated with a chilling formality that his former girlfriend, Sarah, currently incarcerated at the state penitentiary, had formally requested a visitation. The words "currently incarcerated" hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like a forgotten phantom limb suddenly throbbing with pain. Sarah. The name itself was a whisper from a different lifetime, a time when David was not the impenetrable titan he was today, but a young, ambitious man hopelessly entangled in a passionate, turbulent romance. Her incarceration was not news, of course. The scandal had been sensational, splashed across every tabloid and news channel a decade ago, a dark stain on his fledgling career, a spectacular collapse that he had fought tooth and nail to distance himself from. He had succeeded, building his empire on the ashes of that public humiliation, ensuring that Sarah and her fate remained firmly in his rearview mirror. Or so he had believed. Now, a decade later, the request from behind those cold bars felt like an unearthing, a demand from the past that refused to stay buried. Why now? What could she possibly want from him after all these years? The letter stirred a potent cocktail of apprehension, indignation, and, to his own surprise, a flicker of something akin to curiosity. He had thought himself immune, his heart encased in layers of steel forged from ambition and self-preservation. But the mention of her name, the stark reality of her continued imprisonment, chipped away at his carefully constructed defenses. A decade-long mystery, shrouded in public condemnation and his own deliberate amnesia, suddenly demanded attention. The letter was not merely a request for a visit. It was an invitation to reopen a chapter he had forcefully slammed shut, a challenge to confront the unresolved emotions and unspoken truths that had festered in the dark corners of his memory. The thought alone was profoundly unsettling, a disruption to the carefully cultivated order of his solitary, successful life. It was as if the universe, in its infinite irony, had decided that his past, no matter how distant, was finally due for reckoning. If you find yourself captivated by tales of buried secrets, unexpected twists, and the enduring echoes of a past that refuses to stay silent, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this intricate story unfolds, piece by shocking piece. The faded, crinkled letter lay heavy on David's mahogany desk, a stark counterpoint to the sleek, minimalist design of his office. He picked it up again, his thumb tracing the embossed letterhead of the law firm he barely remembered. Each word, penned in an elegant, almost archaic script, seemed to amplify the decade-old silence that had settled around Sarah's name. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic and strategic planning, was now a turbulent sea of conflicting emotions. A visit to Sarah, after 10 years, tucked away in some unforgiving concrete and barbed wire institution. The very idea was an intruder, a phantom from a past he had painstakingly buried beneath layers of ambition and success. He'd built an empire, meticulously avoiding any thought of the girl who once lit up his world, only for this summons to rip open the old wounds with a casual, almost indifferent tone. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the glittering cityscape that was, in many ways, his personal trophy. But even the panoramic view couldn't distract him from the insistent whispers of memory. Their past, a whirlwind of youthful exuberance and reckless abandon, flashed before his eyes. Sarah, with her unruly auburn hair and eyes that sparkled with an almost dangerous intelligence, had been his anchor and his tempest. They'd met in college, two ambitious minds sparking off each other, fueling dreams of conquering the world, hand in hand. Their romance had been intense, a whirlwind of late-night study sessions turning into passionate declarations under moonlit skies. He remembered her laughter, a pure, uninhibited sound that could chase away any shadow. He remembered the feeling of her hand in his, a perfect fit, a promise of forever. It was a love that felt invincible, until it wasn't. The scandal had erupted like a volcano, spewing ash and darkness over everything they had built. Vague headlines, sensationalized reports, and hushed whispers had painted Sarah as a master manipulator, a cunning opportunist who had crossed ethical boundaries for financial gain. The specific charges remained a murky blur in David's mind, deliberately so, for he had chosen to believe the worst, to protect himself from the pain of questioning. He'd seen the evidence, or what was presented as evidence, in the papers. It had seemed overwhelming at the time. The details of her alleged involvement in a complex financial fraud scheme, the missing funds, the compromised accounts, it all pointed to her. Or so it seemed. He had been so young, so naive, so utterly heartbroken. The world had just swallowed her whole, and he, consumed by his own nascent career and the crushing weight of public opinion, had let it happen. His guilt, a dull ache he had learned to live with, was now flaring into a sharp, insistent throb. The internal battle raged within him. Should he go, What good would it do? Would it bring closure or simply reopen wounds that had barely scabbed over? He pictured the sterile visiting room, the thick glass, the uncomfortable silence. What could she possibly say? What could he? The image of the prison itself, a gray, formidable structure he'd only seen in documentaries, felt like an insurmountable obstacle, an external manifestation of the walls he'd built around his heart. The very air around the idea of visiting her felt cold, heavy, and full of unspoken accusations. Driven by a restless curiosity he couldn't suppress, David found himself at his computer, typing Sarah's name into a search engine. Years of deliberate ignorance dissolved in a flash. Old news articles, yellowed and pixelated, resurfaced. The sensational headlines screamed betrayal and deception. Local prodigy imprisoned for grand fraud. Sarah Jenkins, the architect of deceit. The prose was scathing, portraying her as a hardened criminal, devoid of remorse. He scrolled through the comments, a venomous chorus of condemnation. It was jarring, a stark contrast to the vibrant, idealistic woman he remembered. He found himself trying to reconcile the image of the woman he had loved, the woman who would sketch fantastical inventions on napkins and dream aloud of changing the world, with this media-constructed villain. It was as if two completely different people bore the same name. He clicked on a link to a court transcript summary, skimming the dry, legalistic language. The prosecution's case had been meticulously built, seemingly foolproof, leaving no room for doubt. Yet, something gnawed at him. The sheer scale of the operation, the intricate web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. It felt too sophisticated for Sarah. Not that she wasn't intelligent, far from it. But her passion had always been innovation, creation, not elaborate financial manipulation. He remembered her disdain for the cutthroat world of corporate finance, her preference for ethical, sustainable business models. The articles painted a picture of a calculated, cold-blooded criminal, an image that simply didn't align with his memories of her empathy, her fierce loyalty, her almost childlike wonder at the world. A subtle crack began to appear in the edifice of his long-held beliefs, a sliver of doubt that slowly but surely started to widen. The official narrative, once so solid, now felt incomplete. The stark reality of the decision settled over David with the weight of a decade. He would go. The mental gymnastics, the agonizing internal debates, they had all led to this unavoidable conclusion. A part of him, a deeply buried, wounded part, yearned for answers, for closure, for anything that might soothe the persistent ache Sarah's absence had left. The drive wasn't merely a journey across state lines. It was a traversal through the landscape of his past, a pilgrimage to a place he never thought he'd revisit. His luxury sedan, usually a bubble of serene solitude, felt like a pressure cooker, each mile bringing him closer to an unknown reckoning. He rehearsed conversations in his head, 1,000 different scenarios playing out. Would she be bitter? Would she be cold? Or would he see a flicker of the woman he once loved? The vibrant, passionate Sarah, whose laughter could light up any room. He pictured her face, but the image was always blurred, distorted by time and the harsh realities of incarceration he'd read about. He mentally drafted apologies he wasn't sure he owed, questions he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white against the dark leather. The city lights faded into the endless expanse of rural highways, each passing sign a countdown to the prison's formidable gates. He arrived at an ungodly hour, the sky still bruised with pre-dawn twilight. The facility loomed, a monolithic gray structure against the pale horizon, its high walls topped with razor wire, a chilling testament to its purpose. The air was thick with a palpable sense of confinement, even outside. Inside, the sterile waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale hope. He filled out forms, presented his identification, went through the dehumanizing process of security checks. Each step further stripped away his millionaire facade, reducing him to just another visitor, another face etched with concern, waiting for a brief, supervised encounter. Then, the moment arrived. They led him into a small, drab room, a table separating two chairs. The door opened again, and she walked in. 10 years. A decade. It felt like a lifetime. The woman who stood before him was undeniably Sarah, yet profoundly changed. Her once lustrous auburn hair was streaked with gray, pulled back severely from a face that bore the unmistakable lines of hardship, of worry, of resignation. Her eyes, once sparkling with untamed spirit, now held a deep, quiet sadness, a wisdom born of suffering. The vibrant colors she once favored were replaced by a faded, utilitarian jumpsuit that swallowed her frame. She was thinner than he remembered, her shoulders slightly stooped, as if carrying an invisible weight. A shockwave of emotion coursed through David. It wasn't just sadness or regret. It was a complex cocktail of guilt, sorrow, and an unexpected surge of protectiveness. He remembered every detail of her, not just the physical, but the way she smelled of jasmine and old books, the way her hand instinctively sought his, the way her laugh would always end with a theatrical exhale. And now, this ghost of the woman he loved, trapped within these walls. The emotional impact was staggering, a punch to his gut that left him breathless. He felt a profound ache, a realization of the irreversible passage of time and the cruel hand fate had dealt them. Sarah's gaze met his, and for a fleeting moment, he saw it. That flicker of the old fire, quickly veiled by caution. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her. She sat down slowly, her movements deliberate, practiced. "David," she said, her voice raspy, softer than he recalled, yet still carrying that underlying strength. It was the first word spoken between them in 10 years, and it hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. "Sarah," he managed, his own voice hoarse, choked with emotion. He wanted to reach out, but the table, the rules, the invisible barriers between them were insurmountable. You look different." It was a clumsy, inadequate observation, but the only one he could articulate past the lump in his throat. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, a sad, knowing curve. 10 years tends to do that, David, especially in here. Her eyes scanned his face, taking in his expensive suit, his slightly fuller frame, the faint lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You've done well for yourself." There was no bitterness in her tone, only a detached observation. The conversation that followed was tentative, filled with vast, echoing silences. They spoke of mundane things, the weather, superficial aspects of their lives, anything but the elephant in the room. He told her about his company, vaguely, avoiding details that would highlight the vast chasm between their realities. She spoke of her routine, the endless days, the small victories of prison life, a good book, a quiet moment. It was an awkward dance, each step carefully measured, each word weighed. He finally broached the subject, albeit indirectly. "Sarah, why now?" She looked away, her gaze drifting to the scarred surface of the table. "I needed to see you, David. There are things you don't know, things you never knew." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, laden with a significance that sent a shiver down his spine. The truth isn't always what they tell you, David, especially when powerful people are involved. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was why he came. But her words were cloaked in riddles, tantalizingly vague, yet undeniably hinting at a hidden narrative. He leaned forward, his curiosity piqued, a knot of dread beginning to form in his stomach. What revelations lay beneath the surface of her guarded statements? What profound truth had been buried for a decade, waiting for this moment to finally see the light? He felt a sudden, desperate urge to peel back the layers, to understand the mysteries that had defined their lives for so long. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The answers he sought were far more complicated and far more dangerous than he had ever dared to imagine. The air in the visitation room grew thick with unspoken words, each pregnant pause amplifying the weight of Sarah's cryptic pronouncements. David watched her, his mind racing, trying to decipher the nuances in her expression, the subtle shifts in her posture. She was no longer the defiant, heartbroken woman he remembered from the court transcripts, nor the hardened prisoner depicted in media reports. She was something else entirely, a mosaic of past pain and current resilience, her eyes holding secrets that gnawed at his carefully constructed peace. "What do you mean, Sarah?" David pressed, his voice barely above a whisper, afraid to break the fragile atmosphere. What truth? What powerful people? A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips, a gesture that did little to reassure him. "You always believed what you read in the papers, didn't you, David? What the police said, what the prosecution spun in court. It was a neat, tidy narrative, easy to digest." Her gaze held his, unwavering. "But life and death are rarely neat, are they?" David felt a prickle of unease. He had, indeed, absorbed the public narrative, the official story that had painted Sarah as a reckless, manipulative individual, responsible for the catastrophic event that had shattered their lives and his burgeoning career. He remembered the sting of betrayal, the anger, the overwhelming sense of injustice he had felt at the time. Yet, even then, a minuscule, nagging doubt had lingered in the deepest recesses of his mind, a dissonance between the Sarah he knew and the monster the world had created. He had suppressed it, buried it under layers of ambition and success, convinced that accepting the official version was the only way to move on. I had no reason to doubt it," he mumbled, his conviction wavering under her intense scrutiny. "Everything pointed to—" He trailed off, unable to voice the accusations that had once felt so certain. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, though it was clear she controlled the conversation, setting the pace and the revelations. "Everything pointed where they wanted it to point, David. That's the difference. There's always someone pulling the strings, someone orchestrating the chaos, especially when fortunes are at stake." Her eyes narrowed, focusing on something unseen beyond the sterile room. "Do you remember the night before? Everything happened? The meeting we were supposed to have, the last-minute change of plans?" A jolt went through David. He did remember. He remembered arguing with her on the phone, the frustration he felt because she had abruptly canceled their dinner reservation, claiming she had an urgent, unexpected business matter to attend to, one she couldn't discuss with him at the time. It had been unusual, given their transparency, and it had sown the first seeds of discord between them, seeds that had later blossomed into full-blown resentment when the tragedy unfolded. He had dismissed it then as a sign of her growing recklessness, another piece of the puzzle that seemingly confirmed her guilt. Yes, he said slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You said you had to meet with someone. You wouldn't tell me who." "Precisely," Sarah confirmed, a strange glint in her eye. "And do you remember who insisted on that meeting? Who rescheduled it at the last minute, making it impossible for me to bring you along as I originally wanted?" David's mind raced, sifting through a decade of suppressed memories. His career at that point had been on the precipice of a major breakthrough, a huge deal that would have catapulted his company into the big leagues. There had been rivals, of course, sharks circling, always looking for an advantage. He recalled a specific individual, a powerful, ruthless competitor whose company had coincidentally benefited immensely from the fallout of Sarah's conviction, acquiring many of the assets and contracts that David's firm had been poised to secure. The connection had always been there, a faint whisper in the back of his mind, but he had dismissed it as mere coincidence, a byproduct of the chaos. "Are you saying—" he began, a cold dread seeping into his bones. "I'm saying," Sarah interrupted, her voice gaining strength, "that I was a pawn, David. A convenient scapegoat. They needed someone to take the fall, someone to deflect attention, someone whose ruined reputation would serve a greater purpose. And darling, you and I, we were both in the way." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "They didn't just want me out of the picture. They wanted to cripple your ascent, too. My downfall was merely the most efficient way to achieve both." The words hit David like a physical blow. He remembered the financial struggles, the near bankruptcy of his company in the aftermath, the relentless media scrutiny. He had fought tooth and nail to rebuild, driven by a fierce determination to prove everyone wrong, never once suspecting that the initial blow might have been orchestrated. Sarah's revelation challenged the very foundation of his success, implying that his triumph had risen from manipulated ashes, not just his own resilience. "But how? Why didn't you say anything at the trial?" David's voice was a ragged whisper. "Why endure all this if you were innocent?" A profound sadness washed over Sarah's face, extinguishing the earlier glint of defiance. "Because, David, the truth was too complex, too dangerous. They had dirt on everyone, threads connecting them to places you wouldn't believe, and they made it very clear that if I spoke, if I implicated anyone, not only would my own life be forfeit, but yours would too. Your career, your reputation, everything you were building. They promised to dismantle it piece by piece, to ensure you never recovered." Her gaze pierced his, filled with a raw, protective intensity he hadn't seen in years. "I chose to protect you, David. I chose to take the blame, to let them spin their lies because I believed it was the only way you would survive." David stared at her, utterly stunned. Her words painted a picture of a sacrifice so profound, so devastating, that it shook him to his core. All these years, he had lived with the conviction of her guilt, the bitterness of her perceived betrayal, only to find out she had been shielding him all along. The reality of it was almost too much to bear. Sarah, the woman he had loved, had not thrown their lives away in a fit of recklessness, but had, in fact, saved his at the cost of her own freedom and reputation. The seed of doubt had not just been planted, it had germinated, taken root, and was now tearing through the hardened soil of his long-held assumptions, unraveling a decade of perceived truths. His world, once so clear-cut, was now shrouded in shadows, filled with unseen manipulators and a horrifying, unspoken conspiracy. He realized, with a chilling certainty, that the fight to truly understand their past was far from over, and that uncovering the full extent of this complex betrayal would require far more than just a simple visit. The words Sarah uttered, veiled in their cryptic wisdom, echoed in David's mind long after the visit ended. The truth isn't always what they tell you, David, especially when powerful people are involved. They had pierced the hardened shell of his success, lodging themselves deep within his consciousness. He returned to his opulent, yet now strangely hollow life with a new purpose, a gnawing conviction that something fundamentally wrong had transpired 10 years ago. The carefully constructed narrative of Sarah's guilt, the one he had reluctantly accepted, began to fray at the edges. Driven by an insatiable need for clarity, David decided he could no longer stand by. His personal fortune, once a source of comfort and pride, now felt like a tool waiting to be wielded in a fight he hadn't known he was meant to wage. He initiated his own investigation, a clandestine operation shrouded in the utmost secrecy. His first call was to a discreet, highly recommended private investigator, a former federal agent known for his relentless pursuit of obscured facts and his absolute discretion. He provided the investigator with every detail he could recall about Sarah's case, the dates, the names, the accusations, omitting nothing. "I want you to look into everything," David instructed, his voice firm. "Every witness statement, every piece of evidence, every report. Find what was missed. Find what was hidden." The investigator, a man named Marcus Thorne, possessed a calm demeanor that belied his sharp intellect. He meticulously began to peel back the layers of a decade-old case, sifting through public records and archived news reports. David, meanwhile, immersed himself in the old news articles he had found online, reading them with fresh, skeptical eyes. He cross-referenced names, timelines, and locations, a growing sense of unease settling over him. He started feeling a distinct chill, a spreading awareness that the story he'd been fed was incomplete, perhaps even deliberately misleading. Weeks turned into months. Marcus Thorne's reports started trickling in, each one a piece of a disturbing puzzle. The first significant inconsistency emerged from the police report itself. A crucial witness, whose testimony had been pivotal in solidifying Sarah's guilt, had a history of financial difficulties and was known to have received a substantial, untraceable cash payment shortly after the trial. The payment, conveniently categorized as consulting fees, was never linked to the case during the original investigation. David's stomach churned as he read the details. This wasn't merely an oversight. It reeked of calculated manipulation. Further investigation by Thorne revealed more alarming discrepancies. Several pieces of forensic evidence, initially presented as conclusive, had been handled in a manner that raised serious questions about chain of custody. A key piece of physical evidence, a coded message found at the scene, which prosecutors claimed implicated Sarah, had seemingly vanished from police storage archives without a trace. Its disappearance was noted only in a cryptic internal memo, buried deep within the case files Thorne managed to procure through his vast network of contacts. The original trial had accepted these flaws as minor clerical errors, but now, viewed through the lens of potential conspiracy, they screamed of deliberate sabotage. Witness testimonies began to unravel under Thorne's scrutiny. Several individuals who had provided statements against Sarah were found to have ties to a specific business conglomerate, a direct competitor to David's fledgling company at the time. Their statements, once seemingly independent, now appeared suspiciously coordinated, almost rehearsed. One witness, a former employee of David's startup, recanted his original testimony to Thorne, admitting he had been coerced by veiled threats against his family and offered a significant sum of money to lie. He was terrified, but now, a decade later, burdened by guilt, he was willing to talk, albeit anonymously. The magnitude of the deception began to weigh heavily on David. He started to see the intricate web of lies, the careful orchestration designed not just to convict Sarah, but to deliver a crippling blow to David's burgeoning business empire. The revelation felt like a physical blow, a betrayal far deeper than he could have ever imagined. He realized now that Sarah's conviction hadn't been an isolated incident, but a strategic move in a much larger, more insidious game. Then came the first truly shocking discovery, a direct thread connecting the past to the present. Marcus Thorne uncovered undeniable evidence that a powerful business rival from that era, a titan of industry named Alistair Finch, had a vested, almost obsessive interest in both David's downfall and Sarah's conviction. Finch, a man known for his ruthless tactics and cutthroat business practices, had seen David's innovative startup as a direct threat to his established multi-billion-dollar corporation. Thorne meticulously documented Finch's clandestine meetings with key figures involved in Sarah's prosecution, including a prosecutor who had inexplicably fast-tracked the case and a judge who had an unusually high rate of rulings favorable to Finch's interests in other unrelated cases. The motive was chillingly clear. By orchestrating Sarah's frame-up, Finch not only neutralized a perceived personal threat to David but also severely destabilized David's company, which had been generating significant buzz and investment. The scandal, the public outcry, the ruined reputation, all of it had nearly crushed David's business before it could truly take off. Even though David had eventually soared to success, the initial disruption caused by Sarah's arrest had set him back years. David stared at the thick file Thorne had compiled, his hands trembling. Alistair Finch. The name resonated with a cold, familiar dread. He had always suspected Finch played dirty, but to what extent? To frame an innocent woman and destroy lives for corporate gain. The sheer depravity of it left him speechless. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about a deeply ingrained corruption, a truth that had been buried under layers of power and deceit. He clenched his jaw, a newfound resolve hardening his features. This was only the beginning. There were still more layers to uncover, more betrayals to unearth. He vowed that Alistair Finch would pay, and Sarah, finally, would see justice. David's initial investigation had only scratched the surface, a mere preamble to the rot that lay beneath. His private investigator, a former detective named Miller with a nose for buried secrets and a network of contacts stretching into every dark corner of the city, had delivered the first truly devastating blow. The powerful business rival, Sterling Industries, had indeed orchestrated a campaign to sabotage David's burgeoning tech startup, but the tangled web of deceit extended far beyond a simple corporate espionage plot. Miller's detailed report, laid out meticulously with timestamps, call logs, and financial transactions, meticulously outlined how his former business partner, Michael Thorne, had been complicit. The shock of it was visceral, a betrayal so profound it left David reeling. Michael, the man he had trusted implicitly, the architect of their early successes, the confidant who had shared late-night pizzas and grand visions of the future. Michael, who had been godfather to his nephew, who had stood by him through personal crises, had also been the snake in the grass. He had fed Sterling critical information, leaked proprietary data, and deliberately sabotaged key product launches, all while maintaining an air of unwavering loyalty. The financial incentive was substantial, a staggering sum that dwarfed what David could have imagined, but the personal cost, the shattering of trust, was immeasurable. David sat in his opulent home office, the meticulously bound report spread before him, the flickering screens of his monitors reflecting the cold, hard truths. He reread the passages describing Michael's involvement, his eyes tracing the damning evidence, each word a fresh stab of pain. It wasn't just corporate espionage. It was an act of personal malice, a deliberate attempt to dismantle David's life from the inside out. Sarah's conviction, once seemingly a distinct tragedy, now began to interlock with this larger, more sinister tapestry of betrayal. The realization that Michael had been actively working against him, not just professionally but perhaps even in setting up the very circumstances that led to Sarah's downfall, was a horrifying revelation. He had always considered himself a shrewd judge of character, a man who could see through facades. Yet Michael's betrayal had been meticulously crafted, a decade-long performance of friendship and solidarity. The memory of Michael's feigned sympathy during David's darkest hours, his commiseration over the loss of Sarah, now twisted into something grotesque and manipulative. It painted a picture of a man utterly devoid of conscience, driven solely by greed and a chilling capacity for deception. The anger that simmered within David began to boil, a potent mix of fury and bitter disappointment. Armed with this new, damning information, David decided to revisit old colleagues, those who had worked closely with both him and Michael during the tumultuous period leading up to Sarah's arrest. He framed his questions carefully, avoiding direct accusations, instead seeking details, nuances, and forgotten conversations. He spoke with former engineers, marketing managers, and administrative staff, subtly guiding their memories back to that time. The conversations were illuminating, each one adding another brushstroke to the emerging portrait of betrayal. One former engineer recalled Michael frequently losing crucial project documents just before deadlines, causing significant delays and cost overruns. A marketing executive recounted Michael consistently undermining David's decisions in subtle ways, planting seeds of doubt among the team. These were microaggressions, easily dismissed at the time as incompetence or stress. But now, seen through the lens of Miller's report, they formed a pattern of deliberate sabotage. He also specifically inquired about Sarah's interactions, looking for anything that might shed light on her role or the events preceding her arrest. Many remembered Sarah as a dedicated, passionate employee, fiercely loyal to David and the company's vision. No one recalled any suspicious behavior, no erratic actions that might suggest culpability. In fact, several colleagues mentioned that Sarah had seemed particularly stressed in the weeks before her arrest, often seen arguing heatedly with Michael behind closed doors. At the time, they had assumed it was creative differences, but now, David realized it was likely Sarah confronting Michael about his duplicity. During his subsequent visits to the prison, the atmosphere between David and Sarah subtly shifted. The initial tension and guardedness began to dissipate, replaced by a fragile but growing understanding. He shared with her, carefully, the initial findings regarding Michael and Sterling Industries. Her eyes, which had for so long held a deep weariness, now flickered with a quiet intensity. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a profound sadness, a confirmation of a truth she had carried alone for so long. "I knew," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the low hum of the visitation room. "Not all the details, not the full extent, but I knew Michael was working against us. I tried to warn you, David. I saw him with their people, heard hushed conversations, saw documents he shouldn't have had." Her voice cracked with the weight of the memory. "But when it all came crashing down, when they arrested me, I realized what they were doing. They were going to pin everything on you. Your company, your reputation, your freedom. They were going to destroy it all, starting with me, then moving to you. David stared at her, a chill running down his spine. "What are you saying, Sarah?" She looked at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, her resolve unwavering. "I took the fall, David. I saw the evidence they were fabricating against you, the way they were twisting everything. I knew Michael had painted me as the unreliable, volatile one. It was easier for them to make me the scapegoat. If I fought it, they would have just shifted the blame to you. They had enough leverage, enough planted evidence to ruin you completely. I couldn't let them do that. Not after everything we built." Her words hung in the air, a devastating revelation. Sarah hadn't been an unwitting victim. She had been a deliberate sacrifice. She had chosen to protect him, to absorb the full force of their enemies' machinations, knowing it would cost her everything. The woman he had loved, the woman he had unknowingly abandoned to her fate, had performed the ultimate act of love and loyalty. The truth, when it finally emerged, was not just about corporate betrayal, but about a love so fierce and selfless it had endured a decade of unjust imprisonment. David felt a wave of nausea, a profound sense of shame washing over him. He had spent 10 years believing her to be a criminal, when all along she had been his silent protector, her sacrifice the very foundation of his current success. The weight of her unspoken burden, carried alone for so long, pressed down on him, suffocating him with guilt and a desperate, aching need for redemption. The journey to excavate the truth had just unearthed the most heartbreaking revelation of all. The crushing weight of Sarah's sacrifice solidified David's resolve into something unbreakable. He had lived for a decade in a gilded cage of ignorance, mistaking her imprisonment for guilt, when in reality it was a monument to her selfless love. The time for quiet investigation was over. It was time for confrontation. David meticulously gathered every piece of evidence his private investigator had amassed. The doctored financial records, the forged emails, the subtly altered contracts, the witness affidavits detailing coercion, and the damning timestamps of communications between Michael and Sterling Industries' top executives. This wasn't merely suspicion. It was an undeniable, irrefutable mountain of proof. He arranged a meeting, not through formal channels, but through a carefully orchestrated series of veiled threats and strategic leaks designed to cause maximum discomfort. Michael, David's former partner, and Julian Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Industries and David's ruthless competitor, found themselves cornered, summoned to a neutral yet intimidating corporate conference room in a downtown skyscraper, far removed from their accustomed power domains. As David walked into the room, his expensive suit felt like armor, his face a mask of cold fury. He saw the flicker of apprehension in Michael's eyes, the slight tightening around Julian Sterling's usually impassive lips. They were unprepared for the depth of his knowledge, for the sheer volume of his meticulously organized evidence. "Gentlemen," David began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, cutting through the strained silence like a razor. "I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss. Business that cost an innocent woman 10 years of her life and nearly destroyed mine." He laid a thick binder on the polished conference table, its contents clearly marked, each tab a testament to their deceit. "Let's start with this. The day Sarah was discovered to have embezzled funds from our joint venture with Sterling, a fund that, curiously, was audited by your internal team, Julian. And isn't it fascinating, Michael, how your signature appeared on all the documents linking Sarah to the supposed fraud, yet none of your personal assets were ever scrutinized?" Michael shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between David and Julian. Julian, ever the more composed, tried to regain control. "David, This is preposterous. Sarah's guilt was proven in court. You've let an old flame cloud your judgment." David simply smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "Oh, I assure you my judgment has never been clearer. And as for proof, I have considerably more than what was presented in court. Do you recall, Julian, this encrypted message sent from your private server to Michael's burner phone 2 weeks before Sarah's arrest? It details Project Phoenix, a rather unsubtle codename for framing Sarah and strategically acquiring our intellectual property should our company collapse." He projected the message onto a large screen at the front of the room, the glowing text illuminating their faces with an incriminating light. Michael's face paled, his bravado crumbling. He launched into a pathetic attempt to deflect, blaming Julian for coercing him, painting himself as a victim, but David cut him off. "Save your pleas, Michael. We have your recorded conversations with Sterling's legal team, rehearsing your testimony, discussing the exact wording of the fabricated evidence. And let's not forget the anonymous tips you planted with the press, ensuring Sarah's reputation was irrevocably tarnished before her trial even began." Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling their carefully constructed reality. Julian Sterling, seeing the inescapable web of evidence David had woven, finally broke. The sheer audacity of David's investigation, the meticulous detail, left him no room to maneuver. He leaned back in his chair, a defeated sigh escaping his lips. "All right, David. What exactly do you want?" His voice was grudging, but the fight had gone out of him. This was the turning point. David locked eyes with them both, his voice rising with a controlled intensity that commanded absolute attention. "I want the truth, every sordid detail, and I want Sarah's name cleared. You will both sign full confessions, detailing your conspiracy, the fabrication of evidence, the coercion of witnesses, and the malicious intent behind framing Sarah for embezzlement. You will admit to using her as a scapegoat to discredit me and dismantle my company, paving the way for Sterling Industries' hostile takeover." Michael, trembling, looked utterly defeated. Julian, however, attempted one last negotiation. "Even if we do, David, what good will it do? The system, it's slow. She's already spent 10 years. "That's where you're wrong," David retorted, standing now, towering over them. "Your confessions, combined with my evidence, will be presented to the highest legal authorities. We will expose the corruption, the perjury, the entire fraudulent legal process. This isn't about vengeance, Julian. It's about justice. And the full extent of Sarah's sacrifice will be revealed to the world." He then laid out the full financial and legal ramifications for them both, beyond just their confessions. He detailed how he would pursue every avenue of legal action, from civil lawsuits to criminal charges, ensuring not only Sarah's exoneration, but their complete ruin. The penalty for their decade-long deception would be swift and severe. Seeing no escape, caught between David's relentless pursuit of truth and the mountain of self-incriminating evidence, Michael finally broke down, confessing his part in the scheme, his voice choked with sobs and remorse that David knew was largely self-pity. Julian Sterling, a man who had built an empire on calculated risks and ruthless ambition, watched his world crumble around him. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping in defeat, and began to detail the elaborate plan, the intricate web of lies, and the cold calculations that had led to Sarah's decade of undeserved suffering. The confession, uttered in sterile corporate tones, laid bare the full, horrifying extent of Sarah's sacrifice, a revelation so profound it sent shivers down David's spine. She hadn't just taken the fall. She had stared into the abyss of his future ruin and deliberately stepped into it, saving him at the cost of her own freedom. With their detailed confessions in hand, corroborated by David's undeniable evidence, the path forward was clear. David's legal team, already on standby, immediately initiated proceedings to overturn Sarah's wrongful conviction. The wheels of justice, though slow, would now turn with a force fueled by truth and a powerful man's unyielding determination to right a decade-old wrong. Sarah's name would be cleared and the true culprits brought to account. The long-awaited reckoning had finally begun. The weight of Sarah's sacrifice was a crushing burden, yet it also ignited within David a fierce, unyielding resolve. He dedicated every resource, every ounce of his considerable influence to rectifying the injustice. His legal team, now armed with irrefutable evidence of conspiracy, perjury, and obstruction of justice, meticulously dismantled the decade-old case against Sarah. They presented the forged documents, the coerced testimonies, the financial trails leading directly to Michael and Sterling Industries, leaving no room for doubt. The powerful rival, exposed and cornered, attempted a desperate counteroffensive, but David had anticipated their every move, sealing off all avenues of escape. The media, once quick to condemn Sarah, now championed her cause, captivated by the sensational tale of betrayal, sacrifice, and ultimate redemption. Within months, the wheels of justice, once so tragically misaligned, began to turn in Sarah's favor. A special appeals court reviewed the mountain of new evidence, and the original conviction, exposed as a meticulously orchestrated frame-up, was overturned. The judge, visibly moved by the proceedings, issued a scathing indictment of the corruption that had led to such a profound miscarriage of justice. Sarah's name was officially cleared, her innocence unequivocally affirmed. Simultaneously, Michael and the CEO of Sterling Industries faced their own reckoning. Arrest warrants were issued, and the once powerful figures, stripped of their influence and reputation, were taken into custody. The charges against them were numerous and severe: conspiracy to defraud, perjury, obstruction of justice, and manipulating evidence. The investigation continued, uncovering even more layers of their illicit dealings, ensuring they would face the full force of the law for their decades of deceit. The day of Sarah's release dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the grim, overcast morning of her imprisonment 10 years prior. David stood outside the formidable gates of the correctional facility, his heart pounding a rhythm of anticipation and trepidation. He had arrived alone, wanting this moment to be theirs, unmarred by lawyers or media frenzy. As the heavy steel doors groaned open and Sarah emerged, bathed in the morning sunlight, an audible gasp escaped him. She was thinner than he remembered, her features etched with the invisible scars of her incarceration, but her eyes held a new light, a fragile hope that had been absent for so long. Their eyes met across the sterile concrete expanse. It was a moment suspended in time, bridging a decade of lost years, unspoken pain, and unimaginable sacrifice. No words were needed. David walked towards her, each step a testament to the journey they had both endured, albeit in very different ways. As he reached her, he simply opened his arms. Sarah, after a moment's hesitation, stepped into his embrace. It was not a passionate lover's reunion, but something far deeper, far more profound. It was a silent conversation of forgiveness, understanding, and an unspoken vow to heal. He felt the tremor in her body, the almost imperceptible sigh of release as she finally allowed herself to lean on another after carrying such an immense burden alone. They stood there for a long time, the world fading away around them, replaced by the quiet comfort of their shared presence. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah's eyes, though still tear-filled, shone with a strength David hadn't seen since before her arrest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice husky with emotion, "for believing me, for everything." David gently touched her cheek, a gesture of tenderness that conveyed more than words ever could. "You saved me, Sarah. You gave up everything for me. Now it's my turn." Their reunion marked not a return to the past, but the hesitant beginning of an entirely new chapter. Their love, once bright and uncomplicated, had been tested by the cruelest of circumstances, forged in the fires of betrayal and sacrifice. It was no longer the innocent, impulsive passion of their youth, but a love tempered by suffering, deepened by understanding, and rooted in an unbreakable trust. They spent the next few weeks simply being, allowing Sarah to slowly reacquaint herself with a world that had moved on without her, and allowing David to be present for every hesitant step she took. They spoke for hours, piecing together the fragmented memories, filling in the gaps of their separate decade-long odysseys. There was no rush, no pressure, just a shared desire to understand and to heal. The story of Sarah's wrongful imprisonment and her selfless act of protection became a powerful narrative, moving millions. It was a stark reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to the surface, and that courage can manifest in the most unexpected and painful ways. David, standing beside Sarah as she slowly reclaimed her life, understood that his millionaire status, his empire, meant little without the foundation of integrity and truth. He had found something far more valuable than wealth: redemption, understanding, and the enduring, quiet strength of a love that had defied a decade of darkness. Their journey was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a poignant affirmation that even after the most profound betrayals, connections can be rebuilt, and new beginnings are always possible, even if they are shaped by the echoes of a painful past. This powerful story of truth, sacrifice, and the enduring power of love reminds us that sometimes the greatest riches aren't found in bank accounts, but in the unwavering loyalty and profound connections we forge. If Sarah and David's journey resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you find most surprising about their story? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives that delve into the depths of human experience. You won't want to miss our next story, which explores a similar theme of hidden truths and unexpected heroes.